It's not always easy, but as a leader, like if you can trust the people below, then you get a lot more out of them, and it's motivating and it's inspiring. Now, the funny thing about that story was, there's another funny. It's like I said that to someone on my team like a year or two ago. I said, they were hesitant. They didn't have confidence. They didn't know what they could do. I said, be the ball, and they just looked at me. I just said, trust me, be the ball.
This episode is brought to you by Namely. Running HR for a mid-sized business means you hire, onboard, process payroll, keep up with regulations, resolve conflict, organize company events. The list goes on and on. You need software that can keep up with all you do so you can focus on keeping your employees happy and engaged. This is why you need Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that makes life easier for your employees, your boss, and you. Namely's HR platform covers your essential HR and compliance needs in one place. Namely offers it all, from onboarding and payroll to time tracking, benefits, employee engagement, and so much more. Whether you have 50 or 500 employees, Namely's all-in-one integrated platform is designed to be used by everyone every day. In fact, Namely just rolled out their newest feature, continuous feedback. Now you can encourage and engage employees by giving feedback on an ongoing basis. Break away from traditional point-in-time review cycles and make feedback part of the day-to-day employee experience. We want you to build a better workplace with Namely, so we've arranged a special offer for our listeners. Right now, get a free month of unlimited access to Namely's all-in-one HR platform, but only when you go to namely.com/FOW. Again, that's namely.com/FOW. Thanks everyone for tuning into another episode of Leading the Future of Work. My guest today, Steve Youngwood, Chief Executive Officer at Sesame Workshop. Steve, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. I think pretty much everybody knows Sesame. I grew up watching Sesame Street as a wee young lad. My 6-year-old daughter has watched it. My 2-year-old son has watched it. So I think a lot of the people who are listening and watching this have probably watched it when they were younger too. Why don't we start with just a little bit of background information about you? So take us back early on to the days of baby Steve. How did you get involved in what you're doing now? Did you always know that this is the direction you wanted to take?
I did not always know. I always say there was probably, given the job I right now, there's always a bit of a destiny aspect, and that Sesame was born in 1969 and I was born in 1969. So I grew up with Sesame, and we both celebrated our 50th birthday in the same year. But no, I would be lying. Maybe when I was a kid, I grew up in New York. And I think if someone said, what did you want to be when you grew up back then? I think I said a soccer player.
Not a bad career, by the way.
Not a bad career, but I think I peaked in high school. And, when I went to college, I flirted with it. And then as all frustrated soccer players, I became a rugby player and kind of went on from there. But no, it was a series of different things that kind of led me. And then, some things you can control, and some things you take the opportunity. And I feel incredibly fortunate. And, I always say, I'm CEO of an institution that has had so much impact in the past. And I, will hopefully have so much impact in the future. And I kind of stand on top of the shoulders of those who came before me, and feel it is my obligation to the families and kids out there today, but also all the people that came before me that made the organization what it is today, and to lead it so it's as relevant in the next 50 years as it has been in the last 50 years.
So what was your career path like to get to becoming CEO of Sesame Workshop?
So, as I said, I grew up in New York, and then I went to college. I went to Yale, so up in New Haven near New York. And then, I graduated as a history major. As many people were back then, not as common today. I graduated and was flirting with do I want to be, a few things I remember when I graduated. One, it was do I want to get a PhD in history? I loved history. I was sort of really obsessed with the how it shaped the present, but also how it constrained the future in terms of I always called it the burden of history. At the same time, I remember when I graduated, I was in a moment of like, I grew up in New York. I went to school up here. I never lived abroad. I felt like I had done a lot of what one was supposed to do, and
Yep.
let me push myself out of my comfort zone. So this was back in the early '90s, also after the wall had fallen in Germany and the whole sort of Russian Empire and sort of et cetera had collapsed. I was like, you know what? I'm not ready to jump into the career thing yet. Maybe want to do history, and there's great history happening. So I moved to Germany, and I just went to Germany and immersed myself. Didn't speak a language of it. Spent 6 months learning it. Became obsessive about that. Became obsessive about German history, and also was like, trying to understand this. Here's a country that was one country, then two countries, and now it was one country again. I was Jewish, so I was like, let me go to the ultimate sort of like just comfort zone if you're
I'm
Jewish,
Jewish
and
too,
just
so
get myself. So let me walk around a place that I would not have been so accepted, and again, see how that sort of felt. I concluded along the way a couple of things. I concluded along the way was like, this was fascinating. I love history. I'm not intellectual enough to become a historian, so I went the intellectual route of sort of business and said, let me go join management consulting. So I went to McKinsey, started working in Germany, then went to Cleveland. Again, part of my journey of getting out of my bubble, of a New York, New York, go to the heartland and work in factories and all that kind of stuff. Spent more time in Germany. Then eventually made my way to graduate school to sort of, and went out to California again with this goal of like, went to Stanford, obviously great institution, but also another perspective on life. And then from there, I went to Viacom, which is a media company, now called Paramount, actually, which is the heyday of cable TV, when,
yep.
super serving fans. This was Nickelodeon, MTV, and Comedy Central. This was shows I got to live through, launching Blue's Clues and Dora, but also Jon Stewart, The Daily Show, and Chappelle Show, and, The Jersey Shore, and all those, and I got a great education of all aspects of media, what it means to build a brand, what it means to connect with audiences. And, and then also saw the tail end of it as disruption started to happen. And then I eventually left saying, like, how do I take my media experience, the way it connects and moves to people, but kind of point it toward a way that can have sort of great, deep, and long-standing impact. I'd worked a lot with kids, largely Nickelodeon, did a lot of educational stuff, and then I moved to sort of the ultimate, one of the original sort of like deep media organizations, of the Workshop, and eventually was fortunate enough to be part of a turnaround, and now sort of leading it. And that's the way I got there.
For people not familiar with Sesame Workshop, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Sesame Street. What
Yeah.
is Sesame Workshop? How many employees do you guys have?
Yeah. So Sesame Workshop, founded originally as Children's Television Workshop, and then over time renamed to Sesame Workshop, founded, as I said, in 1969. It is a not-for-profit, but it is an educational media organization, dedicated to helping, what we call our mission, helping kids grow stronger, smarter, and kinder. And it was founded on some fundamental principles, and then still sort of the North Star that the founders, Joan and Lloyd, sort of started, still drive it. And it was founded in the 60s when, there was TV was the new technology of the day. But as Newt Minow said, it was also a wasteland. And so it was Joan and Lloyd, Joan Jans Cooney and Lloyd Morissette kind of jointly had sort of the observation, Lloyd seeing his son's or his daughter's obsession with TV, and Joan being this documentary filmmaker, and them coming together at a dinner party, and Lloyd saying, is like, do you think that, I know my kids are learning on TV, but it's not about if they're learning, it's what they're learning, and can you harness the power of this new technology and have it teach them the alphabet versus the words to beer commercials. And that was an idea and a hypothesis. And from that came Sesame Street, which was basically, let's put preschool on TV, take this mass and scalable medium, and use it to educate kids. It was for all kids, but particularly at that time, those who had the least access to early childhood education. And let's see if we can use it to help level the playing field, or at least decrease the slope. It was always about using media and technology because it's engaging, scalable. It was always about focusing on early early childhood, because that's having the greatest long-term impact, and you can sort of like change the trajectory of someone's lives. It was always about education more broadly. It was about the ABCs and one, two, threes, but the whole child, because that's what you need. They're the enablers of learning. There's the actual knowledge you get, and then there's the social emotional. And while it started as the quintessential American show, it quickly became, it 69 in the U.S., it then into Mexico, into Brazil, into Germany, and it quickly became sort of a global phenomenon. And it's how do you take those same things, like take the power of this new technology, make it locally relevant, and use it to sort of educate the next generation of kids,
Yeah.
and families. Today, we're probably about 400 to 500 employees. We're based in New York, but we have offices, about 6 or 7 offices around the world, from India to China to Mexico to Europe to South Africa to Bangladesh, and some other places. And our core is still Sesame Street, but Sesame Street now is much more than a TV show in
Yeah.
terms of it being all the different mediums. And from a content perspective, we're much more than just Sesame Street, as we have gone into other types of mediums, other types of creative avenues.
Yeah. So Sesame Street is the brand that lives under Sesame Workshop.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. So let's talk about your time at Viacom, because you were there during a pretty interesting time. When you think back during your career there, were there any particular moments that stood out to you as far as things that you have learned or things that you thought were most impactful to how you lead or how you think?
Yeah. So there are a lot. I spent almost 17 years there, so
Yeah.
hopefully you take away something. Some was about brand and how you connect with audiences. Again, it was one of the cable TV was taking, you had the networks, and then cable TV basically said, I'm going to super serve certain audiences and really become a destination, for those audiences. If you want music, you go to MTV. If you want comedy, you go to always on type of thing.
Yeah.
And that was and for Nick, it was really a home base for kids, where the versus I need to know what hours it's on. I could always turn something on, and a parent would always also feel comfortable. And that was a really powerful thing to see, is how you super serve audiences, and the relationship and connection that you can have. I learned, and within that you have, properties that become bigger than life itself, and you realize that relation, even if they discover it on TV, that relationship goes across platforms, particularly in the kids audience, where I've really focused on, is that, kids, when they really love something, they want it in all parts of their lives, and you saw sort of that, immersiveness. I saw an incredible customer focus, particularly in the early days, in terms of your super serving audience. It was like research trip. Make sure you know your customer. Make sure you're serving your customer. Don't make decisions on your own kids. Make sure you're doing research. So that was all like an incredible amount that I learned. I also saw the other side of it toward the tail end, which is my tail end, which only kind of got more complicated and still getting more complicated, was when the early to middle years, it was just you sat back and it just grew. More homes got cable, so you got more distribution. And then the internet came and the disruption came, and you saw what happens to an organization where their core business model gets challenged, and that you are, again, this is relatively documented, not just Viacom, but other places, that you kind of, as opposed to being willing to disrupt yourself, you hold on and you get into sort of protective mode, and hoping that change won't happen as quick as it may, or hoping that it doesn't go happen, or it's bad. And
do you remember any of the
you
conversations? Like any of the meetings that you were a
I
part of? Like, did somebody ever say like, hey, there's this internet thing and it's probably gonna mess things up and we should do something? Like, was that a conversation during a meeting that somebody brought up and everyone was like, shut up, Frank, like nobody wants to talk to you?
No, there were very many. I think that was probably even one of the most sort of frustrating. I mean, I think there was an awareness that it was happening. I think there was a denial because they always said analog dollars for digital pennies. So it was hard to like, I know this thing's happening, but there's no business model over there.
Yeah.
So I have to sort of hold on, as long as I can. There was a lot of cake and eat it too type of sort of management. And I think that, and so there'd be big strategy sessions, but then when it came down to actually, am I going to do, what deal am I going to do? There was, I just can't break it. And then
Yeah.
there was like a great deal of containment.
I
I
find that
lived
to be
there
like
through the
super. I find that to be super fascinating though, because it seems like, and I had the former CEO of, former CEO of Blockbuster as well, and I hear this quite a bit,
Viacom,
right?
Viacom owned, Viacom owned for a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I find that fascinating because in a lot of those situations, even at Viacom, it seems like you guys knew. It's not like nobody was aware of this. Like
Yeah.
you saw the potential, you saw that it might disrupt, but we still, still couldn't make the change, the transformation. Why do you think that is? Like, what is it about seeing disruption versus actually saying, okay, we need to change? Like there's a gap there somewhere, right? How do you close that gap?
It's a great question. I think that, and it's one of my lessons. And as I talked, like, I use the word rewiring. I think that some of it you're in denial, and you can paint different narratives because there have been times in the world where people thought like this is going to change the world and this everything's going to transform, and then it turned out it didn't. And so there was the early stage that you would say is denial, hoping it wouldn't happen as quick as as something may. I think that there is. It takes a completely. I in my head in my own management I have to push about. There's adapting and then there's rewiring.
Mm.
And when you have such adapting is you kind of hope you can get there incremental, and rewiring is takes a lot more fundamental sort of shift in fortitude, and may take sometimes changing some people. And then I would think the way I would defend it a little bit was the only thing is like it was such a great you know business model, both that the cable operators had as well as the content providers, that you're like, it was just hard to rationalize. Okay, I know I have to change, but where am I going to go? Because none of it's as
Yeah.
good as where I came from. And but it wasn't because people were blind. I think it was more about people didn't know what to do, and you probably needed sort of those great. You needed to rewire yourself more than just thinking I can evolve and
Mm. Do you have any fun stories from your time at Viacom? And I know this is a very general question, but obviously Jersey Shore was there. You mentioned some big shows. There were a lot of interesting executives at that time. Do any particular stories or situations come up that you look back on and you're like, you are like something where, let's say you're at a dinner party and somebody comes over to you and you guys start talking. You're like, oh man, I remember this time I was at Viacom and like, this character came over from, or this person from Jersey Shore or MTV or the Real World, or
yeah.
this
So
executive threw a chair at me.
yeah, no. So the smirky ones. There was I mean, the memories of. There was a big holiday party every year. The MTV Network's holiday party. MTV Network was the umbrella over all these
Yeah.
brands. And you look, nothing me, but you look back at it was the 1990s and early 2000s were different than today in terms of what
Yeah.
would be acceptable at an office, holiday party, and it almost makes you feel uncomfortable looking back in terms of the things that were hired and put there.
Yeah.
There is the funny smirky thing of like when the first SpongeBob tape came in episode, and people are looking around like, I don't know, maybe we'll pick this thing up, maybe some people laugh. It's certainly never going to sell any products, seeing that, seeing obviously what came from that. I had the fortune, and maybe different people, I mean, he's different now, but when Dave Chappelle first sort of started and became this sort of phenomenon, and sort of like overnight, and having meetings with him, and I'm the little 20-something-year-old, like, here, I can help you, knowing Dave Chappelle, he's like, doesn't need help from anybody.
So wait, you were
But
in
I
some of
had the
those early
fortune.
meetings with Dave Chappelle?
Yes, after his after, I don't know, early, but he's only there for a couple seasons before
Yeah.
he basically, the fortitude had said, like, yes, I know there's X $20 million, but that's okay. I'm gonna go do my own thing.
Yeah.
So you could imagine, I had lots of different managed positions, but there were times I was managing like DVDs or managing other type of products. And DVDs, he was a phenomenon. He was a guy who he broke every DVD record, like sold 2 million in one day. But he was like, "Hey, we're gonna make
Wait,
T-shirts
who
for
is
you."
this?
Dave Chappelle. It sold to
Oh,
his
Dave
show
Chappelle. Okay.
sold 2 million. Yeah, yeah. But I remember pitching him. We can even make more money for you. Look at these T-shirts, and you could just see his. You could imagine Dave Chappelle reacting to a bunch of business executives telling him that I'm really going to grow your brand, and just let me help you. I remember meetings with Matt and Trey trying to do like, trying to expand their brand. Again, another type of creators who are just geniuses and brilliant at what they do. You,
South
you
Park,
know,
right?
South Park, yeah, Matt and Trey from South Park. Um, they're just stories over stories of of that type of stuff. I remember meeting, we Ariana Grande, two different people were launched during my career. Ariana Grande before she was Ariana Grande, and Harry Styles when he was on One Direction on a TV show, and bringing Harry Styles to a TV upfront and Justin Bieber to a TV upfront. Hey, look, we've got these 16-year-old kids. I think they can sing. you know, and
That's
then obviously
crazy.
years later they become something that they're different. But
Yeah, I didn't
it was
know.
a time.
Yeah, I didn't know you were in any of those meetings with Dave Chappelle. That must have been fascinating to be on those meetings, just to like see the see how his mind works, see where the conversation's gonna go. You're in your early 20s, and you're like, Dave, we should make T-shirts.
Yeah, no,
That's
he
hilarious.
always beats to his own drum. And I remember the moment, it was like 15 years later from that. I was in a hotel in LA, and I was like, oh my God, that's Dave Chappelle. I'm going to go say hi to him and see if he remembers me. It was when he was starting his comeback, and it was like 11:30, and he was about to go to a midnight show in LA as he was like secretly going. So sure enough, I walked up, and he gave me the hey dude, and obviously had no idea who I am. But it was closing the circle, and it was a fun experience. And
Wow,
to
that's
see
awesome.
all that genius.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great. This episode is brought to you by Namely. Running HR for a mid-sized business means you need software that can keep up with all you do to keep your employees happy and engaged. This is why you need Namely, the all-in-one HR solution that makes life easier for your employees, your boss, and you. Namely's HR platform covers your essential HR and compliance needs in one place. Whether you have 50 or 500 employees, Namely's all-in-one integrated platform is designed to be used by everyone every day. And with their newest feature, continuous feedback, you can encourage and engage your workforce by making feedback part of the day-to-day employee experience. Right now, you can get a free month of unlimited access to Namely's all-in-one HR platform, but only when you go to namely.com/FOW. Again, that's namely.com/FOW. Go there right now and get your free month of unlimited access. So anything else in particular you learned from your time at Viacom? I mean, I think the lesson around spotting transformation versus being able to take advantage of transformation and actually transform is a really fascinating one, because I think one of the things a lot of leaders struggle with now is, how do we know when we spot a disruption, and how do we know
Hmm.
when we should actually do something as a result? And we've seen a few of these, right? We talk about, for example, the impact of AI and artificial intelligence. We talk about like augmented and virtual reality, the metaverse,
Hmm.
Web 3.0 and blockchain. And there's just a lot of stuff out there where people are trying to decide, is this a disruption or not? And if it is, how do you know what to do? So when you were at Viacom, how were you guys thinking about this? Was there a process, or was it just kind of like just everyone's opinion in a room?
No, there was. I mean, there was a powerful thing which I do take a lesson, and obviously, you know, constraints got in the way. Was, and I take this. You know, we did toward my end. We were, and my end was I left there in 2014. So, you know, it was things only accelerated more after that. There was this eye opening. It's like, okay, guys, let's not debate about next year or the year after. So we did actually have a pretty powerful process. Let's think, make assumption. What's the world like in 5 years or 10 years? Because that's a much more liberating. Because then it gets to the debate about not if, it's about when. And versus timing when disruption will settle. And that was actually a pretty powerful exercise. Actually, really a lot of good led by the leadership and a lot of good thinking. And there was some disruption it allowed us to do in terms of called TV everywhere and different types of things. I think there was just a ceiling of it. So that and a lesson is like take the timing up. You may not take the trying to time it away and take just where you think the world's going to end up. And that was opening and liberating. Again, I still just think you could take it foresight. You could take it the way it's a public company, the way markets. At the end of the day, I still want to know what your quarterly earning was, so you even know more fortitude, because you need to be able to rewire how they're going to measure you, which is even sort of higher. So they have to take the leap of faith as well, particularly when a company's highly leveraged and they have all these ratings agencies that are telling them what the it's going to be. So there's a lot of things that need to sort of be rewired for you to be able to rewire your company. And when you're a public, and it's one of the reasons people go private sometimes to rewire themselves.
So I like that exercise. You try to imagine the world 5 years from now and kind of work backwards from there. Was this like an exercise that you guys all did together?
Yeah, we did. And that was one great sort of project, and it led to a lot of great sort of early of the innovation. And I launched some reimagined experience called the Nick app that we launched, and we won an Emmy award, and it was disruptive. There were still constraints because it's an ecosystem play, and the cable operators had to be. A lot of people had to sort of get on the boat, and it was hard, but that was a very liberating. There's some great stuff that came out of MTV and Comedy Central around that. It just all there was a ceiling just because you were from a business model perspective, really hard to disrupt yourself. So,
yeah. All right. Anything else that you want to share about your time at Viacom? Lessons learned, or even mistakes that you think you made along the way, and what you learned?
I think that as I said, I think a lot of the lessons were the ones that I'm there around the importance of deep connection with brand in terms of you're really at a scale of a property going multiple touch points, to realize that sometimes you do need to rewire yourself, and then that's obviously not easy. I'd say the other thing I learned a little bit there, and this sort of took to the next level at Sesame, some of the greatest leaders, the most inspiring ones, there was a Tom Freston, there was a Judy McGrath, I'll talk about this a lot when I talk about Sesame, is leading with your head and your heart, and and finding inspirational leaders that are motivate you just to work with, and being able to do both of those is as a leader, you've got the great strategic leader, you've got the great sort of visionary leader, or the heartfelt one, and to run a business you need both. And I got a teasing of that at Viacom with some of the names I took, and then get one. You run an organization that's purpose driven and mission driven, like Sesame Workshop as a not for profit. That is a table stakes in terms of you're going to drive the organization, because people are there for the mission, but you still got to run the business.
One of the things that I read, speaking of Sesame Street, I don't know if this is accurate or not, but by the time a child watches an episode, it can take up to 1 year for a single episode to go from I guess idea to production to being released?
I mean, our and we've rewired ourselves in the last couple of years to meet the moment. It from the we're very it can really be a lot at 18 months. It can actually,
Wow.
from the
For one
beginning.
episode.
Yeah, well, yeah, episodes are done in batches, so it's not like they're. I mean, you film over a 3 month period, you write over a 3 month period, and that's because we're very. And again, I'll give you the rewiring example of recently, but like, we are very research driven, and we are like trying to always identify, what are the most, and there's a curriculum. What are the most important issues, that are affecting kids and families. Let's identify what those are in the moment. Let's write a curriculum. Let's write scripts that have the curriculum in it, but don't trust what a 40 or 50-year-old person thinks. Go test it with kids to see if they're taking away what they think, and then you go film it, and then you may do a little research to make sure it actually worked, and then obviously you get ready to do it. I mean, it can be 12 to 18 months depending upon what it is.
Wow.
In order for us to be as sort of thoughtful, as we can, because I like to say is that one of my big lessons coming from a Viacom and more, entertainment was the end game versus we entertain in order to educate.
Hmm.
We have to say, you can't reach, you can't teach. So that's the top of the funnel, but in order to educate, so it's about actual impact versus perceived impact. So we want to make sure like the intended outcome is actually there. So that's why
Yeah.
it takes so long.
Interesting. So you mentioned rewiring a few times. I mean, I read that one of the things that you guys had to do, and again, this is what I read, so you can tell me if this is correct or not, but especially during the pandemic, is you had to, it seems like speed up quite a bit. And there were some of the shows, for example, what was the one that I read? Power of We, but you
Yeah.
had to kind of change the way that you create and get content out there. So can you talk a little bit about how you guys had to rewire that? What did you do differently um,
Yeah.
to do that?
Yeah, it was a seminal and sort of inspiring, moment in the face of a challenging time, obviously for the country, let alone the world. So when COVID hit, everyone has that day that generally that Friday, March whatever, when people are like, "Oh, this thing's for real," and we better go home. So we shut our offices. We had one more week of production of that season, and we shut that down. Too. And I remember a day or two later, and everyone's right there. In the moment, you're about, oh my God, I got all these logistics. I got my family. I got my help. I got to get help. I remember the week after, you're watching TV, you started seeing some of these late night hosts, Jimmy Fallon and other people, like starting to film some episodes from their bathroom. I was like, we got Muppets. I just made a couple phone calls before things are really locked down, because I was in New York and De Blasio was still in denial, actually, and the schools were still open. I just said, get the Muppets at home, get the Sesame Street, send them to the Muppeteers, get them a camera. We're kids, we're not animated, we're live action, so let's do something only we can do, and let's start experimenting. And you get the beauty of YouTube, so you can get distribution overnight. So you're like, let's start comforting these kids, and let's experiment. Let's do a couple things, and let's start. This is easing into. I said we're very meticulous and thoughtful, but it's kind of like the pivot. I was like, guys, you know what? Let's get it 90% right in the moment versus 110% right, after the moment. And so we started to doing that. We then, and that was the new philosophy, which is like, yes, normally have trust that we've been doing this 50 years and we know what matters to kids. We know how to speak to them. And no, it won't be 100% right, and we will learn along the way, but they need us now and families need us now. So I said the 12 to 18 months. We then proceeded completely remotely to create, which was Elmo's Playdate, which was, again, this theme of just like virtual playdate. You're not alone. That went on air. It was the beauty of partnerships too. I think in end of March, I was like, you know what, let's do this thing. Called up our friends at Warner. They said, yeah, we're in. Called our friends at PBS. They said, we're in. Called some of our friends of the family, Lin-Manuel Miranda, Anne Hathaway, a couple others. Completely filmed a remote sort of special within a week or two on air. and at that time on air across all of Warner's channels, across PBS, onto the BBC in the UK, into NHK in Japan, and it was completely out of what we're used to be doing in terms of like in line in terms of we meet kids and families needs, but not in line in terms of
Yeah.
the speed and quickness, and
Hmm.
that went to the next level on a whole different, after the tragic death of George Floyd. um on we were like, again, how do we meet there's kids and families need help to sort of digest this. And we got on a Monday, talked to again our partner CNN, and on Saturday we were on there for a 90-minute town hall with the CNN anchors, with our characters, with our experts, helping them make sense of what they were seeing,
Hmm.
and having faith that we know how to help kids cope and help to explain complex issues. And it was transformative in terms of our culture and that confidence, like, wow, we can do it, we can trust. And that it was almost like we now view ourselves, we have the things that take our 12 to 18 months, but we're now an organization that can help in the moment. And obviously COVID was a moment, went on, and we've evolved, other things related to some of the racial justice issues, and it was transformative. And I keep telling people, even if things go back to normalish, let's not lose that. Let's not lose that.
It seems like the big lesson there was basically trust your people.
Trust your people, trust your expertise, and be willing to change your process if that's what's needed to serve your consumer.
So you talked about rewiring quite a bit, and I understand you had you had an accident when you were on a bike, and that kind of forced you to rewire yourself. So can you share a little bit about the story around what happened and what did it do to force you to rewire yourself?
Yeah, and interestingly, it came all near that Viacom tide of having Viacom needing to rewire and the whole the disruption. So it was in 2013. I become, I like to say, many people get in their 40s like, I'm going to bike. So I'd become a biker, and I was on vacation, and my wife is French, and I went to France, and what we do every summer, to be with her family in a beautiful island called Corsica. It's very hilly, and and you can't go more than a mile without going up a hill. And I went biking, got up that morning, went up, going up 2 hours, and then 2 hour up is basically 20 minutes down, and sort of started coming down the hill on one of these things that was a two-way road, but really 1.5 lanes wide. Come around a turn, and sure enough, there's a car coming at me the other way. Hit the car. Fortunately, the bike took the brunt of it, but I flew off. Driver's side window open, head goes into it. Next thing I know, I'm lying on the ground, completely paralyzed. Someone sort of looking over me. Fortunately, I was able to move my feet, but I was paralyzed from the waist up. Airlifted to Marseille for surgery, then eventually airlifted back to New York, and still, relatively, paralyzed. And you can see me now. I'm fortunately back to a good place, but it was a year of rehab, and I'm not the same person I was before. And you're sitting there, all that rehab. It's like what was physically happening to my body was the nerves were bruised, not broken, but the head could think. The arms could eventually, I got movement, but the arms couldn't move because in the middle, the CPU per se was completely broken, and the body finally kind of reinvigorated and rewired itself. But many things don't come back in terms of certain reaction time. And I remember like wow, my body's rewiring. I have to sort of like take embrace and take a different perspective, and acknowledge what is going to be not the same and forward, and have a different perspective on life because of the new sort of reality. And it taught me lessons about, okay, internalizing, of, again, the body rewiring your brain to sort of embrace and move forward. Taught me other leadership lessons about like optimism. It's like, you need to be, as particularly as a leader, and I feel it as CEOs, you need to be optimistic, because you're never going to get there if you don't believe in it, while staying realistic, because you don't want to, deny reality. I had a former boss always say, always keep your passport stamp to reality. But you also need to be optimistic, because people want to be inspired and believe in the future, and but they can't be blind to it. And so I had to rewire myself, my body rewired, and it again, that idea, accept the change and then react to it and reformulate whatever you need to do for that, versus being deniable, and do it with a glass half full. Was a powerful personal, and it's something, having seen it, I sort of carried to my leadership, as well. And it's hard to internalize it. It's hard to recognize when you really, have to change. And then as a leader, it's not just you. Then you got to get other people to believe in it, and it's the ultimate sort of test, your own self-awareness, and then sort of taking it to the next level.
One of the things I like to do in the last 15 minutes or so of all the episodes is to really look at some action items for leaders out there. I thought one good place we could start is looking at the turnaround of Sesame Workshop. Maybe some of the things that you have done to allow for that turnaround to happen. And then maybe we could talk about what some leaders out there could be thinking about for their companies too. So give us a sense of where was Sesame Workshop? Like how bad were things for you guys to even necessitate a turnaround, and what did that turnaround look like? Thanks for tuning into this episode with Steve Youngwood. Remember, if you subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts for $4.99 a month or $49.99 a year, you're going to get a bonus episode with Steve where he talks about how to judge if a product or service is going to be successful, how leaders can rewire themselves, and how to be both optimistic and realistic at the same time. This is only available for subscribers, and as a subscriber, you will get ad-free listening, early access to new episodes, and a bonus episode like this one with Steve. Again, it's less than the cost of a cup of coffee a month, so I hope you decide to subscribe and support the show.